If you think silence is the most powerful weapon after a breakup, you're wrong. And what I'm about to tell you might make your stomach tighten a little, because the move you believe protects your pride could be the very thing slowly erasing you from her emotional world. Before we go deeper, subscribe and like this video right now. Not for me, for you. Because the truths we talk about here aren't comfortable, but they will change how you move as a man. I'm going to speak to you directly, not as a critic, not as someone judging you, but as a psychologist who understands how women process attachment, loss, and emotional safety. You've been told to go no contact, block her, disappear, become a ghost, let her wonder, let her chase. And sometimes, yes, space can reset dynamics, but there's something far more painful to a woman than silence, indifference. Not loud indifference, not performative coldness. I'm talking about calm, grounded, emotionally regulated detachment, the kind where you are not angry, not bitter, not reacting, just unavailable at the emotional level she once accessed. Here's what most men don't understand. Silence still signals emotional charge. Silence says, I'm hurt. Silence says, I'm waiting. Silence says, I care enough to withdraw. And women are extremely intuitive about emotional charge. When you go silent, but your energy is heavy. When you're stalking her stories, asking mutual friends about her, secretly hoping she feels your absence. She feels that. Even if you never text her again, she senses the cord still attached. That doesn't disturb her core. But when a man genuinely releases the emotional grip, when he stops orbiting her world psychologically, something shifts. Women don't fear silence. They fear replacement. They fear irrelevance. They fear emotional displacement. And displacement doesn't happen when you vanish dramatically. It happens when you evolve quietly. The move that hurts more than silence is growth without announcement. When she realizes you didn't collapse, you didn't beg, you didn't spiral publicly, you didn't try to prove anything, you just upgraded calmly. That's the psychological edge no one explains to you. And once you understand it, you'll never use silence the same way again. Let me tell you something most men never hear. Women don't emotionally detach the way you think they do. When a relationship ends, she doesn't instantly shut down. She replays, she analyzes, she rewrites the story in her mind until it makes emotional sense. And when you go silent in a reactive way, you give her a clear narrative. He's hurt. He's trying to regain control. He's waiting. That story comforts her, because if you're hurt, she still matters. If you're angry, she still matters. If you're trying to trigger her, she still matters. You see the pattern? Emotional charge keeps you relevant. But the moment your behavior communicates something different, not coldness, not revenge, not ego, but stability, that's when her nervous system starts to feel something unfamiliar, uncertainty. Here's what hits deeper than silence. When she checks your social presence and senses no indirect messages. No cryptic quotes, no sad songs, no subtle shots at her, just peace. When mutual friends mention you, and there's no bitterness in your tone. When she realizes you're not performing strength, you are strength. Women are deeply attuned to emotional calibration. She can feel the difference between a man pretending to move on and a man who truly recalibrated his identity. And that's what destabilizes her, because now she can't position herself as the emotional center of your growth. Most men try to win by creating absence, but absence alone is neutral. It's what fills the space that matters. If silence is filled with tension, she feels pursued energetically. If silence is filled with grounded momentum, she feels replaced energetically. And replacement, not by another woman necessarily, but by purpose, discipline, new standards, activates a very different psychological response. Now she questions her decision. Now she wonders if she miscalculated your value. Now she feels something heavier than missing you. She feels excluded from the version of you she once had access to. And understand this clearly, women don't crave chaos. They crave emotional security. But when a man they once emotionally invested in becomes secure without them, it forces reflection. Not because you punished her, but because you evolved beyond the emotional contract she assumed you would stay inside. That's what hurts more than silence. Silence says, I'm wounded. Growth says, I'm done bleeding. And those are not the same frequency. Now listen carefully, because this is where most men sabotage themselves without realizing it. You start improving, but you improve loudly. You hit the gym, and suddenly every story is a flex. You start reading, and now every caption sounds like a motivational speech directed at her. You begin dating again and make sure it's visible. That's not indifference. That's signaling. And signaling still revolves around her perception. When your growth is a performance, it keeps her psychologically centered in your life. Even if you never speak to her again, she can feel that your evolution is reacting to her absence. Women are highly sensitive to emotional motivation. They can sense when a man is transforming from inspiration versus transforming from injury. Transformation from injury says, "I'll show you." Transformation from clarity says, "I see myself now." Those energies feel completely different. The second one is what unsettles her, because now she doesn't feel like the catalyst of your rise. She feels like someone who underestimated a man who was always capable. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Women are attracted to emotional leadership, not dominance, not control, leadership. When you spiral after a breakup, even silently, you emotionally follow her decision. When you react, you orbit her choice. But when you accept, adjust, and redirect your focus without resistance, you step back into internal authority. And that shift doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it doesn't explain, it simply moves. This is why genuine indifference feels heavier than silence. Silence can be strategic, indifference is internal. Silence is something you do. Indifference is something you become. And once you become emotionally self-sourced, meaning your validation, direction, and stability are no longer tied to her, she feels the energetic withdrawal, not of communication, of access. She can text you and feel the difference. She can see you and sense the emotional door is no longer wide open. You're polite, calm, respectful, but not available in the same way. And that subtle shift does more psychological damage than blocking her ever could. Because now she can't provoke a reaction. She can't confirm control. She can't read you. And when a woman can't read a man she once deeply understood, curiosity and anxiety begin to mix. Not because you hurt her, but because she no longer feels certain of her position in your emotional world. That's where the power actually lives. Not in disappearing, but in becoming unshakable. Here's the part almost no one talks about. Emotional withdrawal is not just about absence. It's about recalibrating your value in her mind without ever saying a word. Most men assume that ignoring her texts or ghosting is the pinnacle of strategy. It isn't. That's just drama dressed up as control. True psychological influence is invisible. It's quiet, it's subtle, and it's devastatingly effective. Think about this. When you've been in her orbit, she knew how to move you. She knew which comments stung, which moments provoked jealousy, and which words would ignite tension. That's power she held over you. Silence preserves that energy, but it doesn't remove it. She can still manipulate a silent man because he's still emotionally tethered. What hurts more than silence is presence without dependency. It's existing in her world as a man who is fully detached from the narrative she thinks she controls. She might see you at a party, in a story, or even through friends, and nothing stirs her. You're polite, you're composed, you're even smiling, but you are fully self-contained. Your happiness isn't influenced by her choices. That subtle shift forces a very uncomfortable reflection. If I can't disturb him, what does that mean about my power? And women don't like questions without answers. They crave clarity. They despise uncertainty when it's tied to emotional access. And when they can no longer generate that charge in you, it creates tension stronger than any angry confrontation or dramatic no-contact post. Here's the psychological hack most men miss. It's not revenge. It's not manipulation. It's alignment. You're not doing this to punish her. You're doing this to reclaim yourself. And paradoxically, when a man steps into this state, the woman who once had access to his emotional world often begins to notice. She starts remembering the depth she underestimated, the calm confidence she once dismissed, the man she assumed she could always influence. And because human brains are wired to seek emotional energy, when she realizes she no longer has the same pull, it triggers introspection, anxiety, and curiosity. It's a subtle ache she can't name. And that, my friend, is the kind of effect that silence alone can never create. You see, what really hurts her isn't that you're quiet. What hurts is that you exist in her world, fully alive, fully present, without being emotionally available. That's invisible dominance. That's the power most men never understand. Now let's talk about what most men completely misunderstand: the difference between waiting and living. After a breakup, a lot of guys sit in silence, hoping she'll reach out, hoping she'll realize what she lost, hoping she'll feel the absence. And every day that passes, that hope anchors you to her world. You may not text her, but psychologically, you're still orbiting her universe. Women sense that. They can feel when a man is still emotionally invested, even if he's no contact. Your heart, your thoughts, your mental energy, they're all still tied to her. And when they sense that, it reduces your value in their mind. Not because they don't care, but because power isn't in longing, it's in presence. Here's the hard truth. The man who suffers silently is predictable. The man who reacts emotionally, even subtly, is readable. But the man who moves forward, who embraces growth, purpose, and independence without a trace of her influence, is unknowable. And the unknown is magnetic. It triggers intrigue, reflection, and sometimes regret. Think of it like this. Silence is a tool, but evolution is a weapon. When you shift your energy from longing to living, you stop existing in her narrative and start existing in your own. You become the version of yourself she assumed she could influence, but can no longer access. That's when the tables turn, not through confrontation, not through manipulation, but through quiet dominance. And let's be real, no one teaches this. Society tells men to act angry, act vengeful, or act absent. But absence alone is just emptiness. What creates real psychological impact is abundance. Abundance of confidence, abundance of purpose, abundance of self. When she sees that you're thriving, not reacting, not pining, it hits harder than any dramatic post, message, or attempt to make her jealous. Here's a secret few will admit. Women aren't drawn to the man who waits. They're drawn to the man who thrives in spite of them. And when that happens, she's forced to ask herself questions she can't answer. Questions about her choices, about your worth, about the power she once assumed she held. This is the invisible pain that cuts deeper than silence. It's quiet, it's relentless, and it leaves a mark without ever uttering a single word. And when you fully understand this, you stop fearing no contact and start embracing a strategy far stronger, living with presence, purpose, and emotional sovereignty. Here's where most men crash without even knowing it. They confuse being unavailable with being cold. There's a huge difference, and women sense it instantly. Coldness is reactive, calculated, ego-driven. Unavailability is organic. It's rooted in self-possession, not in trying to hurt her or make her chase. One destroys attraction, the other awakens it. When a woman sees a man who is emotionally self-sourced, a man whose mood, focus, and energy are independent of her actions, something inside her shifts. She realizes she no longer holds the key to your emotional world. She can text, call, even attempt to provoke, and nothing moves you. Not because you're punishing her, but because you've built a life she can't touch. This is why your silence can backfire if it's fueled by attachment. If you're withholding because you're hurt, you're still emotionally accessible. You're just withholding access to make her notice you. Women feel this. It doesn't confuse them. It clarifies your attachment. It shows her she still has influence. But when your unavailability comes from inner alignment, from building yourself rather than reacting to her absence, that's when it pierces deeper than any no-contact text or blocked number ever could. She doesn't just notice. She feels it in a visceral way, a subtle tension that makes her question her assumptions about you and the relationship. And here's a truth most men ignore. Attraction is never about logic. It's always about perception of value, strength, and emotional independence. When you appear tied to her absence, even silently, you signal incompleteness. But when you appear whole, even without speaking, you signal irrelevance, not cruel irrelevance, pure, magnetic irrelevance. This is why women often check back after they've moved on emotionally. It's not just curiosity. It's a nervous system response to a man who operates on his own frequency. And that frequency, it's calm, it's unshakable, it's grounded in something far deeper than pride or ego. If you want to truly create impact, you have to stop thinking in terms of tactics and start thinking in terms of energy. Not posts, not messages, not gestures, your energy. The man who masters his internal state hurts more by simply existing than the man who tries to control the narrative. And once you internalize this, you'll understand why the old rules of no contact are outdated. Silence alone is weak. presence without attachment is lethal. Here's the final truth most men never face. Women remember emotional availability, not words. She doesn't need you to text, call, or argue to understand your impact. She feels it in your absence, not the absence of your voice, but the absence of access to your emotional world. That's what leaves a mark. Think about every time you felt drawn to a woman. Was it her texts, her voice, or was it the energy she gave off? The way she made you feel seen, desired, and challenged. Women operate the same way. If she can no longer reach you emotionally, if she can no longer provoke, charm, or engage that part of you she once held, that creates a silent weight, a tension she can't name, a pull she can't control. Most men make the mistake of reacting, stalking stories, sending indirect messages, trying to trigger jealousy, or proving their worth. All of that keeps her in your orbit. It keeps her story about you alive. And that story is still centered on her power to affect you. What hurts more than silence is complete detachment paired with thriving. When you live fully without reference to her, you remove the very thing she relied on, her role in your emotional universe. She can no longer confirm her impact. She can no longer predict your behavior. That creates uncertainty. And humans are wired to react to uncertainty, especially when it comes to attraction and emotional bonds. You want her attention? Stop trying to get it. Stop responding to her energy with your energy. Stop allowing her to be the pivot of your emotional state. Focus on your growth, your purpose, your life. When she sees you thriving without her influence, without trying to prove anything, that's when she experiences a pang deeper than any angry text or desperate call could produce. The paradox is brutal. Letting go fully, evolving independently, and existing in emotional sovereignty is what forces reflection, introspection, and sometimes regret. It's not punishment. It's evolution. And evolution is magnetic. It doesn't beg. It doesn't chase. It simply exists. Fully alive, fully grounded, fully self-sourced. And when she realizes she no longer has access to that version of you, she experiences a quiet ache, not for your silence, but for your autonomy. Not for your absence, but for your presence on a level she can't touch. That's the kind of psychological power no man ever learns in dating books, social media tips, or no contact strategies. It's invisible, it's potent, and it's yours to claim. Now understand this, because it's the final piece most men never grasp. The deepest impact doesn't come from manipulation, games, or dramatic gestures. It comes from becoming a man who cannot be emotionally disturbed by her or anyone else. That's the truth that shakes the foundations of attachment, desire, and regret. Not your silence, not your messages, not your attempts to control. When you operate from this state, everything changes. She can see you. She can hear about you. She can even meet someone new. But nothing touches the version of you that is anchored in clarity. You're not cold. You're not indifferent in a reactive sense. You're unavailable because your energy belongs to yourself, and no one can rent it without your permission. And here's the part that hits the hardest. Women often realize too late that they had influence over a man who was willing to give them access, but that same man chose to rise above the emotional pull. That realization doesn't arrive through confrontation. It doesn't come from arguments or proof. It comes quietly, subtly, like a shadow crossing her awareness. You see, the human mind remembers who was steady, who was grounded, who remained unshaken in the storm. It forgets the noise, the chaos, the dramatic attempts at getting attention. Emotional permanence isn't earned by suffering in silence. It's earned by mastering yourself in her absence. And that mastery communicates more than any words ever could. When you step fully into this energy, two things happen simultaneously. You reclaim your own life, and you force reflection in the person who once had access to it. That reflection is uncomfortable, mysterious, and often unforgettable. And it's a psychological truth most men will never experience because they are too attached to the idea that absence itself is power. But real power is invisible. Real influence is untouchable. Real attraction is earned by becoming the man who can exist fully, confidently, and abundantly without her, without needing validation, without orbiting anyone's emotional world. So remember this, the move that hurts more than silence isn't distance. It isn't resentment. It isn't longing. It's your evolution, fully lived, fully embodied, fully unshakable. And when she realizes she can no longer influence or access that man, she experiences something far more potent than any silence you could ever maintain. She experiences your freedom and the weight of what she let go. That's the truth most men never learn, and the truth that changes everything.